Hi, Bernard. Bernard, are you the only one or others joined as well?
So I can see others as well.
Okay,
Hello.
perfect. Hi, everyone. I think Kaushik is joining as well. Hi, everyone else. John, Eric, Ricardo, Tall. I can see everybody joined. I was chatting with Kaushik, I think a minute ago, and he's trying to switch to Zoom meeting. Hey, John. John, can you hear me?
I can hear you. So.
Okay. Okay, good. What I was trying to ask somebody in the group who can actually forward the Zoom link over to Kaushik. He had a problem with the Zoom even in the last TSC call last week. I tried to forward, but I think that just makes him Sana when he's trying to join. So somebody can actually forward the meeting invite. Thanks, John.
Sana, I think it's unique for the meeting invite itself is unique for each individual.
I know. So somebody who has the forwarding ability can probably do that. I think I just shared the link with Kaushik once, so that doesn't work.
Yeah, whoever shares this, he'll become them, right? So that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, you're right.
He has to go to Linux Foundation, and then
it's better you share. Maybe we'll say two Sanas.
What he can do is join with his Google account. So basically, use Google with single sign-on with his email.
Well, the issue is that everybody gets their own private link, right?
What I'm trying to say is that you don't need a Linux Foundation account necessarily. You can.
Oh yeah, well, some of us have an feo.org account, the chairs, and maybe those have privileges for just joining. Maybe you can try that.
Yeah, and somebody saying Stephen is saying he can join as John. I think that's fine. We know it's Kaushik, and at least the meeting can get started, and until the next meeting, we can sort this out.
I just sent him the actual Zoom link. I Slacked him, using which, not the one, the private link for me, but the actual one that was sent by the original invitation. Probably he can use it and join. Only thing is he has to register. He has to log in using this Linux Foundation ID, which I think it's not an issue. I think I sent him that. I Slacked him just now. We'll see.
Okay, perfect.
He's showing offline in Slack. Just wondering whether.
I was actually chatting with him on our Google chat, so I can relay the message if you want to.
Yeah, I can paste it. So there's
here.
Yeah.
And I'll I'll paste it there. So maybe he can look into this.
Okay. Yeah, just paste it there in our chat.
And what is this?
So this is the actual Zoom link, right? With which he can register and log in as himself.
Okay, I sent. We'll just give him a few minutes now. Stephen, I think if he joined as someone else, like John or you, and then he can at least speak to everybody else, I think we should be okay with this small group here. It should be fine.
Yeah, I think that's what happened last time. They're like in SIG 2 meeting, we had like 15 towels last time. So
that's
if he's
fine,
willing to
right?
do that, then yeah, we can. Yeah, it's perfectly fine.
And we are not as bad as 15 dolls, so I think we should be good with a couple of Johns or Stephens. So I tried to ping Kaushik. If you're also talking to him, just let him know to be here like someone else, and we should be good to go.
You know, it's easy for you to say, Sana, but if you get duplicated 100 times, we'll see how you feel.
That would be very funny, doll. Yes, I agree.
So Halloween, man, it's good in the spirit, Halloween day.
Yeah, you know, we are just becoming something else. Yeah, Kaushik is here. Hey, Kaushik, we can't hear you yet. We have been talking about how to get you on the bridge.
Hey, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Oh, we have the real Kaushik now. Wow.
Yes, real Kaushik with his real name. He made it.
Yeah, I've been masquerading and impersonating everyone out there.
Kaushik and SIG automation meeting, they had 15 dolls. That's what I heard.
All right, we got to beat that one.
Yeah. Kaushik, we are 10 minutes out. I'll leave the mic to you and let's dive in if you're ready to do this.
Hey, Sana, sorry, I missed the initial thing. Do you want me to dive into the user stories? Is that what the plan is, or?
Yes. Let's re-review that. Let's take questions, and I think that should be a good agenda to refine that the user story document.
Okay, so I did some updates to the user stories based on the feedback from the last time, but I will admit I did not update it in the format that I forget. It was Bernard or someone who had stated we should define it outlining who the user is for each user story, what the user journey looks like. There was a format that was prescribed. I have not done that part, but I have gone and refined it. So maybe we can just go over it quickly, and then maybe I'll follow it up later this week with the format structure changes.
Kaushik, that sounds good. I think when we open the document and when we see that, we might have a lot of comments and questions coming up again, as we had so much last time. So I think we'll find an opportunity to take a look at that a second time.
Okay, I just need to figure out how do I project from Zoom.
You see the green button in the lowest level
that says
share screen, yeah.
If I project, I cannot unmute myself. That gets grayed out.
Let me share, and then maybe you can speak to that, if that works.
No, there's a share tab audio choice, which looks like I had selected. Is it better now?
Yes, we can hear you and we can see the screen.
Perfect. Hey, okay. So first thing, in terms of comments from some of you on the product goals and product scope, I did update some of the interfaces, 3GPP. I did not call it out at the top level. I just let it be in the specific user stories. This will give us enough information about what interfaces are in scope. I also added some more details about free 5GC and so forth, which were missing in the last time. So that's the first part in terms of inputs from Ravi. And I also made sure, Ravi, if you're on the all of the relevant documents with you offline as well. I have not heard anything in the last 2 weeks. So I assume all of these open comments, Ravi's comments can be addressed. But if not, please let me know if there's specific things that you would like me to capture.
Well, I guess your kids don't ask you to match them in the outfit for Halloween anymore, right? But your big kids, but you can expect that your grandchildren.
Someone has to mute it. The
in the future.
Tina, it looks like you're not muted.
Yeah, definitely. You pass the.
The person who owns the call can probably mute people.
You still want me to do this, but I just cherish. Yeah, my son is Kenny from the South Park. You know,
Tina, we are hearing all your family stories.
South Park, the orange guy. The guy always wear the orange hoodie. Oh, I'm sorry.
Hey, John, you're the owner, right? I assume you can also mute.
It's okay now. She muted them.
Hey, sorry. So in the middle of this, I don't know if you heard my inputs or not. Should I repeat?
Kaushik, go like a few seconds back, yes.
Yeah, I think Kaushik was saying that we can address all Ravi's comments. That's what you were saying.
Yeah, I was checking if Ravi is on the call. I don't know if he is, but I have gone and updated the documents and shared some of the relevant documents with Ravi. I did not hear any other inputs from him, so I was curious if I could go and mark these as resolved. And again, I can go ping him offline if he is not on the call. I don't see him. Okay, anyways, let's keep moving. I will follow up offline with Ravi. These two comments from Bernard and from Vance, this is what I was just mentioning earlier. I have not updated it to clearly outline the format that both Bernard and Vance have prescribed. So that's on me.
Kaushik, if you've got any questions regarding sort of these comments, just feel free to chat to me via Google Chat, and we can then do that also offline.
Sounds good. I think most of these comments, I understand what changes that I need to make. I just need to go do it.
Yeah, I made some.
That was on the.
So if you like, you can look at the proposals and then basically sort of see how they would match to the document. Yeah.
Correct. Okay, so the next set of comments were from again somewhat from Ravi and from Ven about showing RAN and UE. Again, the scope of this document, I just scoped it to whatever is being automated through Nefio, which are these three NFs. I have some document, updates that showcases how RAN and UE and other, extraneous things outside of Nefio's automation scope will play a role in testing. but I did not want to be specific and be mandating in certain ways, right? It is really up to us telcos and so forth to figure out how do we consume this in a real lab environment and so forth. All of that is outside the ambit of this document. This document is purely scoping to how do we do automation of these user stories, right? So I did not want to necessarily expand the scope of this doc. Maybe when we get to the design and test documents falling out or emerging from this document, product document, we can then entail how we expect everything to be tested, consumed, all of those details. So that was my input here as well to some of these comments. But I did not, again, explicitly, I have not resolved any of the comments. I've responded to all of them. Either Ravi or Wim, if Wim, I responded to your comment.
Yeah, so Kaushik, my comment is it's a bit nitpicking at the end of the day at the moment. The reason of my comment is the following. If you start with the beginning of this section, if you go up a bit, see, here we say work scope, automating the setup of IT transport between various clusters, transport security and ITSec, and then later we say out of scope. So that's the reason of my comment, basically. Would it not be better to say, okay, what do we do in scope for the version 1 and then move all the rest out of scope for now, knowing that we have to do this in version 2 potentially, right? That was the only reason for my comment, basically. Because it's here in scope, I work scope, and then we later on say it's out of scope. So it's a bit confusing for the reader, I think. That's the only reason of my comment.
Perfect, Wim. Thank you. That was actually a copy-paste error. So specifically, we are not automating the transport setup. We will set up the transport, but it will be done out of band, outside of Nefio, depending on what the specific design needs. And it will be not in scope. So I will go update it, but I just crossed it out and I will go update, resolve your comments as well. Good.
Yeah, so it's a bit nitpicking, just a bit refinement, but it's not major things. My comment is just a bit. Sometimes it's confusing when you read it. That's why I raised it.
Understood. Thank you. So this Ravi's comment about RAN UE, I just responded earlier on the call. I will update the comment as well. This one, Bernard, I maybe let's sync up offline when I connect with you tomorrow or so. You had a few inputs about updating the scope of or definition of these user stories. I did not fully understand, like.
So just to share the general idea, it's not about a specific scenario like a free 5G core to be demonstrated from my perspective, but rather the principles of what we would like to address. And so sort of reflecting the design principles which are mentioned above, I just wanted to somehow highlight for each user story the specific objective of what we like to prove or demonstrate, where Nefio helps us become better than what we normally see in comparison. So it's not about if it's a UPF from sort of a 5G core or whatever, it's more about demonstrating the basic principles. And that's what I would love to reflect in each user story, saying, okay, we've got this specific case here, but basically what we would like to demonstrate are how the Nefio principles apply when sort of looking at this specific scenario. And that sort of per user story.
Perfect. No, thank you, Bernard, for clarifying. That's on me. I'll take that to do. And I will take a stab at it, Bernard, but I might sync with you offline.
Okay.
Maybe the way I plan to do this is for each user story, refer back to the design principle document and call out the key design principles that it is attempting to demonstrate.
Mm-hmm. Very good. So I just wanted to, so coming also back to Wim's comment, so when we're sort of doing this testing, we should try to see how these design principles are being tested and sort of not going into the nitty-gritty of sort of how do I properly configure sort of the 5G core, but sort of how do I apply these design principles in this scenario. Okay, thank you.
Sounds good, thank you. there were some questions that I felt a little bit were verging on the side of design. So especially like this comment about auto scaling and different ways of auto scaling, I did not go too much deeper into that.
Yeah, maybe Eric. Yeah, I have also a comment because I think for use case 2.1, we should be careful about the value we bring with Nephio, because if we only want to demonstrate that Kubernetes is able, let's say, to scale, there is no value on that. So we have to be cautious on the what we want to demonstrate within Nephio. That's also why I did a comment, because today in the UPF from 3.5GC, we have only one, let's say, pod today. So scaling this pod in terms of CPU memory, it's only, let's say, a matter of Kubernetes capability today. So that's why I just want also to point out that with Nephio, we really need to demonstrate what we bring on top of existing Kubernetes as it is today. So also a global concern from myself.
I see. So your input is for 2.1, it's not clear beyond, over and above what Kubernetes vanilla.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, these were not, maybe we can scrap out 2.1. This was more incremental, right? We're showing, hey, what are the different horizontal and vertical scaling capabilities that we need to prove. Vertical is vanilla Kubernetes, horizontal is what Nephio can bring. Regardless, this was both these use cases will help incubate from a network design standpoint, like how does a network architect design for needing for vertical scaling and horizontal. It then gets modeled into a CRD and then gets applied on the machines, right? So if you look at the full suite of user journey, then I can see how Nephio intersects with 2.1. But if you just look at the application of resource changes, then it is not. So I think this is back to the question input that Bernard was bringing, is we need to just stating a one-line sentence for these use cases is not adding or clarifying what the real end-to-end intent of the user story is, who the actors are, day zero, day one scenarios that map to each use case, and then how does that translate into what the Nephio design principles that get validated through this. So that's on me, Eric, but hopefully I did answer your question right now in terms of what the Nephio intersection would be.
Yeah, Kaushik, I think last time also we discussed this, probably clarifying that in the way like you expressed it, like both horizontal and vertical, maybe in that language may be a slightly helpful for understanding as well.
Yeah.
For both the control plane and user plane.
Kaushik, I think the idea of mapping it with the design document, how are we validating that, will actually also set the foundation of our comparison with the status quo. Like this kind of automation is all done today, right? Through different models, right? We are doing some out of band work on the infrastructure, then we are deploying the network function through Helm. I think when we compare that to the design document principles and how are validating that, this will automatically help us establish some values to prove in using the approach for operators and CRDs, as we describe that in detail.
Yes, sorry, was that was it an input or was there a question that you wanted me to answer?
It's just a comment. It's just a comment. But the way I'm seeing it's a kind of little unclear to people to understand the deeper dives of the user stories. I think that will actually clarify that detail once you said you will map that to the design document principles.
Yep.
Because those principles actually set Nephio apart from how the existing Helm-based deployment looks like.
Perfect.
So, for example, in the user story 3, what I was thinking in the user story 3, for example, how would the control loop take over some of the scaling work, for example, and how would that be different than how we do this in Helm today? Maybe if I get to say that, we'll find an opportunity on what is happening in the Helm when we are trying to do that. And then we can establish the value of why doing this in operator is way better than doing it in Helm. So that degree of detail will actually prove the points around the nephew values.
So,
Yeah,
I don't know if it's just
Sana.
not me. I don't know. You go in and out, very feeble. I don't know if it's just me or.
Sorry, come again?
No, yeah.
Your audio is kind of feeble.
I'm sorry. Okay, is that any better now?
Yes, it's better now. Yeah.
Okay, I just pulled the mic closer. Sorry. Kaushik, it was just a comment. You can carry on with the flow.
Yeah, absolutely. I fully understand what you're requesting. That's on me. So now moving on to, so that was about user story 2. For 3, Bernard, you have a similar comment as to, again, I'll take it offline. There was one other comment where Eric had requested to, from a real world scenario, what does control plane PDU session scaling entail, right? What work scope would it? Right now, we had loosely made it scope to resource vertical scaling, but maybe there are better ways of, real world scenarios of control plane scaling that we can model here. So Eric, maybe if you have more inputs, or maybe if the telcos have more inputs about, hey, what real world scenarios map to horizontal and vertical scaling of control plane would be great to model.
Yeah, typically I put the example of PDU session. This is really an example we are using in our live networks today. But yes, I need also to check and to find other KPI for that. I will take the point.
Perfect. So that those were the updates on the user stories, and I will take the AI again. I was a little bit sick for the last few days, so I didn't really get to completing all the AIs, but I will resolve all the open questions and make the changes to the scope of and the structure of the user stories, and do the correlation with design principles by end of this week, and I will share it back with the community. Hopefully we are at a stage where we have relatively well converged on the high level product scope. It's mostly the specifics need to come out cleanly so that everyone understands why what we are doing is important. I hope we can mostly resolve these updates offline, meaning we don't need to do potentially more in-person meetings. But again, regardless, I will share everything with the community by end of the week. Any other inputs, thoughts, questions?
I would in the next steps.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. So I would simply be interested in the next step. So just imagine that we've now sort of finalized these user stories. Sort of what would be the next steps? Should we start working on test cases, aligning with the other work streams? So just to get an impression on where to focus our next activities.
Bernard, that's a great question. And this is my thinking. This is what I was hoping we will all get to. Some of us have been doing an early straw man of what the design would be, mapping to these product stories and product scope and user stories. So what we can do is maybe later this week or maybe early next week, we can, at least from somewhat from Google side, given some of our early work in this area, we can share a strawman design with the community just to start to somewhat materialize the design on paper. And again, this is our strawman, and we are happy to work with you. It will not be a full-fledged design document to start with. It will be more of a design proposal. We'll need to do similarly to the product stories. We'll need to do 1 or 2 meetings to then help everyone understand why what we're proposing is in line with all the material and how, and then get community input. So I was hoping we could use that as the benchmark. Once we have a design principle proposal alignment, then we can then both scope the design, go through the specific areas where different folks from the community can contribute. Hopefully the test plans might start to come a little bit later, right? The test cases, we can start to do the work right after the design is gets aligned on. That was again my thought process, but curious to to hear from everyone, Sana and the team, if you had an alternate proposal.
Kaushik, I think that looks like a great idea. The initial proposal will actually give everybody an opportunity to brainstorm and ask more questions, and that way we can actually refine it. And it has to be a living document which can actually be evolved with all the community's inputs. So the first attempt, I think, through your draft would be a very good next step.
Perfect. Any other comments?
So
Hi, I have a
Anne
question
has raised a hand
on
before
the.
me. I'll go. Let her go. After that, I have a few
Oh,
comments.
huh?
Go ahead. Go ahead, Anne. Yeah.
Yeah. Hi. Thanks. I just have a quick question. Do you have a link to this document you're sharing? I'm trying to look for it. Kaushik.
It is linked in the meeting notes for this SIG meeting.
Oh, okay. I think I
I've
skipped
tried
it.
to share it without having the full, seamless sharing process. I've tried to share it with everyone who has requested access to it through your personal accounts. But if you don't, please drop me an email or ping me offline, and I'm happy to share it.
Okay, thank you.
So it should also be there in the drive, right, Kaushik? Otherwise, if that means anybody who has requested access to the drive should have access to it. I mean the architecture drive.
Yeah, I found it in the notes. I look in the architecture drive. I didn't find it, but that's okay. My bad. Thanks.
Okay.
Good
Yeah,
point.
I mean my question to Kaushik is, if it is not there, probably it should be there. That was my comment to Kaushik.
Yeah. I will drop it in there. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So my comment was, if at higher level the use, I think these are the three high level user stories that you're capturing for the release one, right, Kaushik? I mean, this is mainly from the scope perspective. Are these user stories mainly from the scope of the product perspective, but are you also trying to capture the releasable artifacts for version 1? So if that's the case, probably it's a good idea to add stories for how users are going to consume it. For example, how they want to deploy this, deployment guide, or first of all, start with the installer and then deployment guide and some documentation. If you are capturing all the user stories for V1, then probably it's good to add those things to this document as well. Or if you're only capturing the actual product features, functional features, then it's okay. That was my question and comment both.
Yeah, good point, Balaji. So now maybe that when I said design proposal, it will have two things. It will have a high level design specification in line with the compliant with these stories, but it will also have what we call as the critical user journeys, which will have the level of depth that you're describing, right? It'll tell you like who the consumer of that feature is going to be, what the feature set of steps to consume the feature entails, and so forth. It will be much more deliberate in outlining the key user journeys, and I'm bundling that as part of what I call as the design proposal, but it will be somewhat at the intersection of design and the more specific product feature consumption inputs.
Okay, so there'll be specific user stories for deployment of those features and the guides, stuff like that. Okay, thank you.
That is right.
Yeah. So this is my another question, generally not regarding this documentation, but mainly the guys from the telco. So when we do this scaling scenarios for any of the core functions that are described here, either control plane or user plane, UPF, AMF, SMS, etc., do the scaling generally happens in a cloud native way? That is, generally, if you want more capacity or create more replicas, or do you actually increase the CPU and memory footprint of an existing pod that is running? So what is the actual practice? That's mainly for my understanding purposes.
So I believe that these questions typically need to be answered by the suppliers of these network functions. But what I do also believe is that the reason for wanting to scale out and the thresholds of how we can define sort of how we react to, let's say, the number of sessions or sort of throughput requirements, etc. If there's a sort of a customer-related aspect to be reflected here, then sort of the telco operators would say, look here, we've got certain constraints, for instance, for Christmas business, or we do not want to sort of disrupt operations during critical phases of when we are changing infrastructure, etc. These types of control points might be of relevance, but the actual simple scale out or scaling mechanisms, I believe here the vendors of those solutions are typically those who are sort of basically defining these rules.
Yeah, I'll actually agree with that. And I was also thinking, in my so far experience working with some of the big vendors, when you look at the capability of your scale out, I have been working with the 5G core from Nokia, from Ericsson, from Mavenir. The capability, the cloud nativeness is actually the ability of your application, which is defined as microservices, and all these microservices are actually designed independently. So if you are trying to scale out one of the microservice that is related to what you are trying to achieve, that particular microservice should have a capability of dynamic scaling out. If it's not there, then you have a very poor way of achieving a holistic scale out by redeploying the whole thing as one big service. So the function that you're working with has to be cloud native for you to be able to achieve a cloud native dynamic scale out to that. So that keeps me wondering, how good is the free 5GC in that sense? Like, we're trying to demonstrate nephews some really critical principles on them. And those principles can only be shown if we have the capability in some of the network functions ability to achieve things the right way, like the Kubernetes way. I've worked with the Helm charts, but I've never had a chance to actually dig deeper into their cloud native behavior of the network functions. Anybody knows here?
I'll say it's not very, but I do want to add something. I've been working for a while on trying to find ways to help projects that are not very cloud native become more cloud native. Via a few operators that manage the very specific cloud native aspects for them. For example, in discovering and injecting configuration parameters to INI files, right? Kubernetes has config maps for configuration, but they're quite limited. However, this could be made more robust and more integrated into the greater environment. So yeah, the answer, it's not very, but it doesn't mean that that's a dead end. You can make projects more cloud native without changing them significantly, just by adding helpers. It's something I can talk about more in the future if there's interest, or even show a demo of how it could happen.
Yeah, Tal, I'll be very interested to dig into that for many things, for the future scope of Nephew, because eventually we will be working with the other 5G vendors products in this project eventually. We started with the free 5GC. So whatever you can show on the status quo, I am personally very interested in discovering what additional things can we do to achieve a slightly more cloud native behavior in their monolithic design, which is not extremely monolithic, but it's halfway through, I think, in that evolution.
Yeah, thanks everyone for the comments. The reason I asked is we are talking about horizontal scenarios, vertical scaling scenarios. Intuitively, I would have thought, since everything is services based, and then intuitively I would have, my thinking was scale out is the default way to scale in these services. But is it really the case? That's what I was trying to understand.
Yeah, you had a very valid question, very, very valid question. And it sparked so many new things in my mind. And one more comment, sorry, if I can. Go ahead, you were asking, you were saying something.
Oh, I was just gonna sort of follow up on some thoughts there, but go ahead and finish your thought.
Okay, so one more thing that actually makes me feel as if I could brainstorm this idea with Kaushik. A lot of the design principles of Nephew, it was some discussions that I had initially with Kandan as well. A lot of these things that we want to adopt in the industry are extremely dependent on the design of the network function and the capabilities of the network function itself. So one of the big goals behind Nephew at that time when I was working with Kandan were to drive the industry and drive the vendors to adopt some of these more cloud native behaviors in the development and implementation of the network function. So that is a journey which will evolve with time, and Nephew as a project in the open source will actually drive more of that behavior across our common vendors. So I was talking to DT, I think on some other subject with another group of DT, and we had a lot of interesting discussions back and forth on how we are using Helm and how we're using operators. And one thing that came out of that discussion was using Nephew, we should actually release some network function requirements which are more cloud native and which can actually drive the community to become cloud native. And all the service providers who are actually a part of this Nephew group can drive those requirements with our vendors, which will actually promote the principles that Nephew wants to adopt to make things more cloud native, like to the question that we just addressed, the scale out operation. Go ahead.
So Sana, there is actually a work group in CNCF called the CNF.
Exactly, the CNF. Yeah. We can actually merge with them. So under telecom user group or that similar group, we can join forces with them all, and then we can release a document from Nephew as well. And I think then my mind is going into the questions on how would Nephew eventually intersect with all these other CNCF projects. So maybe that's a different discussion. Maybe we can take it at a different time. But since this project is getting a lot of momentum, I feel as if we can release something from Nephew's side as well that will get a lot of traction, but on the same lines, like the CNF requirements, the way they are in the CNCF.
Oh,
yeah, I think that's,
sorry,
that's a great idea.
It's one Sebastian pitching in for Daniel from Bell. So
Hi, Daniel.
I would probably recommend, I'll send you the link on Slack, the demo that was done at Broadband World Forum around cloud native BNG using ATSS, which from Intel, Paul Mannion and the team, which was also presented at Broadband World Forum a few weeks ago. This is actually a great viewpoint of how and probably where Nephew could chime in or not around how this is already done in cloud native way on scaling up and scaling down a function really to the limits of what it can be done. So I'll share the link. Probably it's good to watch, and then afterwards see how this integrates with Nephew, because that's really a bare bone cloud native function, not something trying like we were living through right now. I think it's a good example. I'll send it on the Slack.
That sounds very good, Daniel.
Meeting notes as well, because if it's just on the Slack, people might not see it. That would be helpful, I think.
Okay, I'll send everywhere.
Okay. If I could just comment, I think that from my point of view, sort of yes to everything everybody said. I think that though, in particular, one comment was made with respect to that it really depends very much on the network function. And so from my point of view, the sort of use cases are talking about, there's sort of different areas where scaling can happen. Scaling can happen at the local runtime, runtime edge cluster. And in that case, that scaling may be able to be managed locally by Kubernetes or by a locally running operator. But there are times when that may extend beyond the configuration mechanisms needed. For example, maybe you need to scale and you need to add another interface in a bound interface, right? So you have multiple, you get more throughput or something. In which case you're talking about infrastructure configuration. So I think that there'll be a lot of different cases, and we'll pick different tools in those different situations. But as I tend to harp on, I want to push as much as possible up leftward into the configuration process as opposed to the runtime process, so that it can be subject to our reviews and validation, So from my point of view, the things in the initial use cases are really focused on that kind of config time scaling as opposed to runtime scaling. That also is relevant, I think, because in our case, often the clusters have limited capacity to scale themselves. And so, you know, there may be considerations that can't be taken at runtime. So anyway, but the main point is, it's a great question. Scaling is going to be done in different ways for different functions and in different layers of the stack in many cases. So we have to have all of that in the considerations. That's all I want to say.
Yeah, thanks, John. And one of the motivations of the questions was also like if we get some kind of a scenario, like this is how it's done most of the time. All these scenarios are scale in, scale out. Everything is applicable. Everything is. It could be even operator dependent, seasonal, or it could be even guided by the vendor themselves. So all those things are valid. One of the motivations for me to get this question is, if there is one thing that is done a lot of times, so this is the default use case, then we could prioritize that over other use cases. That was also one of the motivations of asking the question. But like you said, we need to support everything. But I was also trying to see whether we can define some priorities. Thanks everyone for a very, very useful guidance here.
If I may jump in. Yeah, thanks. In response to Sana, I agree on the network functions, the container, the CNF that we use will affect the scaling out locally as well as across cluster, like John said. I just want to double check, get confirmation that the free 5GC network functions we're using are only sample, right? Eventually, I'm hoping that either we can establish some guideline on writing network functions for Nephio, or network functions that can be used in Nephio more natively, or do we somehow pick a set of network function beyond free 5GC to prototype with, to work with? How do this group see that happening? The direction.
I'll give you my 2 cents and then I'll let everybody else chime in who has comments to this. I believe the first demo with the free 5GC will actually establish understanding of the design principles that Nephio is promoting. Like, why is it better for us to use operators and CRDs than using the status quo, the previous model of automation? Once we see that on the free 5GC, we should have some guidelines to apply that to the other vendors' network functions as well. And it's not going to be apple to apple. I'm still trying to understand if there is a way for us to actually put all the operators in a way that currently has the operator hub, something like that for telcos, which will start to increase the library of operators around how to use them for network functions. And a lot of them might be reusable, which we need to discover along the way. But there is a lot of heterogeneity in the telco network functions. Like it's so different from vendor to vendor.
Exactly.
That I don't know what would be reusable among the set of operators that are generated and shared across the community. So a lot is watch and see, but I think the hope is that we should be able to eventually find some normalization, some standardization in the process that can actually promote a more cloud native automation along the way.
Yes, that's where I was going, because as far as I could tell, you know, a vendor like Ericsson or Nokia or any of those guys would have their own network functions and this proprietary secret sauce, you know, and I'm not so sure how to achieve that normalization or recommendations, guidelines that you're talking about.
This can come when those vendors actually also start to participate with us. And this can also come from the fact that the service providers start asking our vendors, like the ones that we are working with, that we need you to support some of the nephew principles. I want you to start delivering operators to me, and I want the automation to be done this way. That, I think, is an evolution that would happen around the nephew community over time. And then things will change. And there is a lot to happen in that space. And I'll let Kaushik and Dol and everybody else comment on that, because it's a very involved question.
Yeah. On a technical side, and I'll last question, and I'll shut up. The technical side right now, the UPF and SMF, at least I've been looking into it, are somewhat quote unquote monolithic, right? We take the existing free 5GC directory projects and we write operators and wrap it. And I read in the Tal's comment in the chat just now. For now, that's good enough, but we could take those, fork them, the network functions, and then cloud nativize them, and then, and that may give us an opportunity to drive the guideline, to create, to derive the guidelines that we want. Would that be a good approach? I want to put it up here for discussion.
That seems great to me, but I'll let others chime in as well.
Yeah, so eventually, in my view, right? I mean, this is the way we are doing for free 5GC. It's an absolutely great first step, but for the long-term success of this, right, the actual commercial CNFs, have to run. So that's what we are making it. So that's why if you see John's design document that he shared, that he's talking about topology, topology intent, and then there are 2 or 3 layers of abstraction there, and then one of the layers is where actually we are defining the KPT functions for the free 5GC, and in a vendor's case, for example, Ericsson or Nokia or Samsung, they will write their own, but rest of the things ideally will remain the same, and then we'll be able to orchestrate them. But eventually, it's the actual commercial CNF functions that need to run in this environment. Free 5GC is fine, or even if you write our own network function, it's fine for our testing purposes, but it won't be deployed in a commercial solution. So this is where we need to influence, to Sana's point, the vendors who provide the CNFs to package or provide interfaces in such a way that it could be orchestrable using Nephew, and also taking the help of telecom players for that. My first-hand experience is we wanted to do something, some kind of this normalizations when I was working on Open Daylight. We were directly working with vendors. It did not work, but when we started working with a couple of top telecom providers in the US, and they started influencing the same vendors that we wanted in certain way in order to achieve automation through this in our network. They started listening to them. So there are different way of persuasion and influence. So we need to take the confidence of a lot of stakeholders here, both telecom players and the CNF vendors, in order to achieve the same. So long story short, eventually the actual CNFs have to run in this fashion. It's free 5GC is a good starting point.
I would like to also add to that in the sense of there are certain limitations where I believe the Nephew project alone will not be able to change the scenario sufficiently. So there are certain standardization requirements regarding session state and sort of protocol handling, which might conflict with the proposals which we will come up with. So we should possibly sort of try to distinguish at which point we might see that sort of also the standards might have to evolve in order to account for those sort of new mechanisms of managing the lifecycle of the network functions in addition.
What do you mean, Vera? What do you mean? Can you explain what you have in mind when you say
Yes. So if you look at the 3GPP standards of how you sort of terminate traffic and decouple sort of the user devices from the backend traffic. You basically have a gateway, and if you would normally do that in standard IP, you would simplify that design tremendously.
Okay, I see what you mean.
Yeah, there are a lot of non-cloud native things in 3GPP.
Yeah, sure.
And the problem with the telco standards evolution and how the web scale evolved is that these were two different worlds, and now these worlds are trying to merge. So you gave us one example, Bernard. There are so many examples of the protocols itself that they run inside the 3GPP. There is a very little chance for us to make those protocols run on the HTTP and HTTPS when they're in the public cloud, right? So I think that the two worlds need to merge, and I don't know how Nephew could be in a central position to drive some of that across the standards and the open source communities. And it's a big, big subject in itself, a big topic.
Agree.
Hey, we have got a minute or so remaining. I just want to quickly level set on a couple logistics. So one, I heard daylight savings changes are coming up in the US. By the way, I've moved to India, so this with the daylight savings, the time will be fairly late for me. I was curious if we could adjust to start 30 minutes earlier, so instead of 9 a.m., 8:30 a.m. Pacific time. When it comes to with the daylight savings, which will trigger before the next meeting, would that work with the members here, or?
Yeah, that's fine with me.
Okay, maybe what I'll do is I'll send an email offline to everyone, and if there are any restrictions or concerns, let me know. But it will be great to bring it forward by about 30 minutes so it becomes India friendly. Secondly, I think we should take a stab at how we expect community to start contributing better. I know we are still in the early stages of design, but maybe this is where Stephen, John, we should take a stab from Google about how we expect community, in what ways across the 363 work streams we should take a stab at defining how do we expect community to start contributing. That will help level set and remove some of the confusion slash lack of clarity on what are the next set of things and how community can start contributing.
Yeah, we should work on that. But then for the workshop, for example, there's a lot of members of the communities that are already coming together and trying to work together. So I think, yeah, we should have guidelines, but for sure, I think folks are contributing.
Perfect. We are over time. Was there anything else, Sana, that you had on mind?
Kaushik, I think I'm good. We had a lot of interesting discussions, and I think I will also take some of these ideas offline with you. I think we had a very good momentum around the CNF requirements at the end of the meeting.
Absolutely. Now, if you don't mind, Sana, if you can compile these in a document, and I'm happy to work with you offline to figure out what actionables we can derive from this.
Absolutely.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great, rest of the week.
Sounds good. Thanks everyone.
Have a good one.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.